What if I told you that the history we know is only a fraction of the story? That entire chapters of human knowledge have been deliberately erased, buried beneath the sands of time by empires determined to control the narrative. There's something haunting about the idea of lost libraries, entire repositories of wisdom that vanished overnight, taking with them perspectives, innovations, and voices that could have reshaped our understanding of the world. These were not just collections of scrolls and codices, they were the beating hearts of civilizations, the accumulated genius of generations, silenced in moments of conquest or ideological purging. Picture this: you're walking through the ruins of an ancient city, and beneath your feet lie fragments of papyrus, clay tablets inscribed with forgotten languages, and the ghostly echoes of ideas that were meant to be eternal. From the legendary Library of Alexandria, set ablaze and lost to flames, to hidden caches in Mesopotamia, Central Asia, and the Americas, empires have systematically dismantled these treasure troves of knowledge. Why? Because knowledge is power, and those in power have always understood that to control the future, you must first control the past. These libraries held alternative histories, scientific breakthroughs, spiritual teachings, and cultural narratives that challenged dominant ideologies, making them threats to be eliminated rather than treasures to be preserved. This video is an invitation to join a journey, one that uncovers the stories behind these lost libraries and the relentless efforts to bring them back to light. We'll explore how modern archaeologists, historians, and preservationists are piecing together fragments of these silenced voices, recovering wisdom that empires tried forever to bury. This isn't just about the past, it's about what these discoveries mean for us today. In a world where information can still be manipulated or erased, understanding how knowledge has been suppressed throughout history feels more urgent than ever. So settle in, open your mind to the possibilities, and let's venture together into the shadows of history to uncover the libraries that time tried to erase. This systematic destruction was far more than mere collateral damage in the heat of conquest. It was a cold, deliberate strategy of intellectual domination. An empire doesn't just want your land and your resources, it wants your mind. It seeks to overwrite your collective memory, to sever your connection to the ancestors who came before you, and to implant its own gods, its own heroes, and its own version of events as the one true history. By burning a library, a conquering force wasn't just destroying objects, it was assassinating a civilization's identity. It silenced the philosophers who questioned authority, the scientists who documented local medicine, the poets who celebrated a different way of life. Suddenly, the only history that remained was the one written by the victors, a narrative designed to justify their rule and portray the conquered people as primitive, backward, and in need of civilizing. This act of erasure creates a void, a silent gap in the human story where entire schools of thought, technological innovations, and cultural philosophies simply vanish. We are left with a distorted, one-sided view of the past, unaware of what we've even lost. The true tragedy is that we often don't know what questions to ask because the answers were destroyed before we even knew the questions existed. This pattern isn't confined to one era or one region. It's a recurring theme woven through the tapestry of human history, from the razing of Mesopotamian tablet houses to the burning of Maya codices in the Americas. It reveals a profound and unsettling truth. The most potent weapon an empire wields is not the sword but the eraser, and this brings us to the most iconic, heart-wrenching symbol of this phenomenon, a story that has echoed for 2 millennia, the Great Library of Alexandria. And so we come to the story that has become the universal shorthand for this catastrophic loss, the Great Library of Alexandria. More than any other, its name evokes a deep, almost mythical sorrow for what might have been. It was conceived as a universal archive, a project of breathtaking ambition to gather all the world's knowledge under one roof. Imagine a single institution that aimed to possess a copy of every known book, every scientific observation, every philosophical argument, and every epic poem from every culture the Ptolemaic rulers could reach. Scholars were sent out with vast sums of money to acquire texts from distant markets, and every ship that docked in Alexandria's bustling harbor was searched for scrolls, which were then copied by a small army of scribes, with the duplicates returned to their owners and the originals added to the library's ever-growing collection. This was not merely a storage facility. It was a vibrant, living center of learning where the greatest minds of the age, figures like Euclid, who defined geometry, Archimedes, the engineering genius, and Eratosthenes, who calculated the Earth's circumference with stunning accuracy, came to study, debate, and push the boundaries of human understanding. The loss of such a place is so profound because it represents the death of a dream, the dream of a complete and unified record of human thought. Yet, the true story of its destruction is more complex and, in some ways, even more tragic than the popular legend of a single, catastrophic fire. The downfall of the library was not a sudden event but a death by 1,000 cuts, a slow erosion over centuries, with different empires each playing a role in its dismantling. The first major blow is often attributed to Julius Caesar during his civil war in 48 BCE. Besieged in Alexandria, Caesar's forces set fire to the Egyptian fleet in the harbor, and the flames are said to have spread, accidentally consuming a portion of the library's collection stored in warehouses near the docks. This was a devastating loss, but it was only the beginning. Later, under Roman rule, the library suffered from neglect and political interference, as emperors viewed its intellectual independence with suspicion. The rise of Christianity in the 4th century brought a new wave of ideological purges. Religious authorities seeking to eliminate pagan influence are believed to have sanctioned the destruction of temples and their associated libraries. The final act likely came with the Arab conquest of Alexandria in the 7th century CE, while the popular story of Caliph Omar ordering the scrolls to be used as fuel for the city's bathhouses is now widely disputed by historians. The conquest nonetheless marked the end of the library as a functioning institution, its final remnants scattered and lost forever. The consequence of this gradual annihilation is almost impossible to quantify. We know names of texts that were housed there, mentioned in the writings of scholars who were fortunate enough to have seen them, but the works themselves are gone. A second book by Euclid expanded writings by the astronomer Aristarchus, who proposed a heliocentric model of the solar system 17 centuries before Copernicus, countless plays by the great Greek dramatists, and entire volumes on medicine, mechanics, and world history all vanished. The intellectual setback was monumental. It's as if the collective memory of the ancient world suffered a massive stroke, forgetting entire fields of study and forcing subsequent generations to spend centuries painfully relearning what had already been discovered and documented. Alexandria's fate is the ultimate cautionary tale, a stark reminder that the flame of knowledge, no matter how bright, is fragile, and while its story is the most famous, it was far from alone. This pattern of erasure repeated itself across the globe, in deserts, jungles, and remote mountain regions, where other great libraries met a similar end, their voices silenced by the march of empire. But if Alexandria represents the ancient world's great intellectual tragedy, then 1,000 years later and far to the east, we find its heartbreaking echo in the story of the House of Wisdom in Baghdad. This was not merely a library but the very engine of the Islamic Golden Age, a period of breathtaking scientific and cultural flourishing that remade the known world. Established by the Abbasid caliphs in the 8th century, its mission was one of breathtaking ambition: to seek out, translate, and build upon the collective knowledge of all humanity. Scholars were dispatched across the known world, from the dusty libraries of Byzantium to the ancient universities of India, returning with priceless manuscripts in Greek, Persian, Syriac, and Sanskrit. Within the House of Wisdom's walls, these texts were not just stored, they were meticulously translated into Arabic, debated, criticized, and expanded upon by a generation of history's greatest minds. It was a true crossroads of global intellect, where the geometric theories of Euclid met the medical wisdom of Galen and the mathematical genius of Indian scholars, all synthesized into something entirely new and revolutionary. It was here that the scholar Al-Khwarizmi systematized algebra, giving us the very word from his book, Al-Kitab al-Mukhtasar fi Hisab al-Jabr wal-Muqabala. His work provided the foundational language for problem solving that would later enable everything from engineering to computer science. In the same halls, the philosopher Al-Kindi made pioneering contributions to cryptography and optics, while the physician Al-Razi wrote exhaustive medical encyclopedias that would become standard texts in European universities for centuries. The House of Wisdom was more than a building. It was a vibrant, humming network of innovation, a testament to the power of open intellectual exchange across cultures and faiths. For 5 centuries, it stood as the brightest beacon of learning on Earth, preserving the classical knowledge that had been lost in the West and then dramatically advancing it. This golden age of reason and discovery came to a catastrophic and violent end in 1258. That was the year the Mongol army, led by Hulagu Khan, grandson of Genghis, laid siege to Baghdad. The city fell, and the ensuing massacre was one of the most devastating in history. But the Mongols did not stop at claiming lives and treasure. They targeted the very soul of the Abbasid civilization. The House of Wisdom was utterly destroyed. Its immense library was ransacked, and countless books containing centuries of accumulated science, philosophy, and poetry were torn apart and thrown into the waters of the Tigris River. Contemporary accounts describe a river of ink, its waters running black for days as the written wisdom of an era was dissolved back into pulp. This was not a random act of vandalism. It was a calculated strategy of cultural annihilation. By destroying the House of Wisdom, the Mongols weren't just looting a city, they were dismantling the intellectual infrastructure of their rivals, ensuring they could not easily rise again. The loss was incalculable and set back progress across multiple disciplines for generations, fragmenting a scholarly network that had connected the world from Spain to China. This pattern of targeting knowledge as a primary objective of conquest reveals a dark and consistent thread in history. Just as empires sought to control land and resources, they understood that to truly dominate a people, you must first conquer their memory, their identity, and their intellectual heritage. And this brutal strategy was not confined to the libraries of the Old World. Across the Atlantic, in the lush rainforests and highlands of Mesoamerica, a parallel story of erasure was unfolding, where an entire literary tradition was systematically targeted for extinction by a different kind of empire. While the Mongols sought to crush a rival empire's intellectual heart, and the Romans let Alexandria fade through neglect and conflict, the Spanish campaign in the Americas presents a different, and in some ways even more chilling, form of destruction: ideological purification. The target was the sophisticated literary tradition of the Maya, a civilization whose scribes had been producing beautiful, screen-fold books known as codices for centuries. These weren't mere records, they were the sacred and scientific pillars of Maya life, painted on long strips of bark paper coated with a fine layer of white lime plaster. these codices were vibrant works of art and precision, filled with complex glyphs that recorded everything from the precise motions of Venus to prophecies, genealogies of kings, and intricate rituals for healing and agriculture. They represented a unique intellectual tradition that had developed entirely independently from the Old World, a library of human thought on a parallel track. For the Spanish conquistadors and missionaries, however, these volumes were not treasures of human achievement. They were the devil's work. The most infamous act in this campaign of cultural genocide was led by a single man, the Franciscan friar Diego de Landa. In July of 1562, in the town of Mani in what is now Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula, de Landa orchestrated a massive auto-da-fe, a public spectacle of faith and punishment. He gathered hundreds of these priceless Maya codices, along with countless statues and religious artifacts, and set them all ablaze in a giant bonfire. His own account chillingly justifies this act, stating that the books contained nothing in which there was not superstition and lies of the devil. In a single afternoon, centuries of accumulated knowledge, philosophy, and history were reduced to ash. The tragedy is compounded by the fact that de Landa was not an ignorant soldier. He was a learned man who later wrote a detailed account of Maya culture and language. He understood exactly what he was destroying, which makes his actions not a product of blind zealotry, but of a calculated decision that indigenous knowledge was inherently sinful and had to be eradicated for the salvation of souls and the stability of the new colonial order. This was not an isolated incident but a central pillar of the colonial strategy. The goal was not just military conquest but spiritual and cultural subjugation. By burning the codices, the Spanish were severing the Maya people's connection to their own history, their gods, their scientific understanding, and their very identity. It was an attempt to force a people to forget who they were, making them more pliable subjects for the crown and the church. The success of this strategy was devastatingly effective. Of the thousands of codices that once existed in temple libraries and royal courts, only 4 are confirmed to have survived the flames, likely smuggled out and hidden at great personal risk or sent to Europe as curious trophies. These 4 survivors, the Madrid, Dresden, Paris, and Grolier codices, are now priceless windows into a lost world, but they are just fragments of a vast and rich library. The depth of what was lost is staggering. The surviving codices reveal the Maya had developed a concept of zero independently, used a complex calendar system more accurate than the one used in Europe at the time, and possessed an astonishingly detailed knowledge of celestial cycles, predicting eclipses and tracking planetary movements with precision that would not be matched in the West for centuries. We can only wonder what other breakthroughs were documented in the burned books. Perhaps there were advanced medical texts detailing herbal remedies unknown to modern science, or historical records that would rewrite our understanding of the Americas, or philosophical tracts exploring the nature of time and existence from a completely unique cultural perspective. The silence left by that bonfire in Mani echoes through history, a permanent void in the human story. Modern scholars are like detectives trying to reconstruct a shredded masterpiece from a handful of scattered pieces. The painstaking process of deciphering the Maya glyphs, which was only achieved in the late 20th century, has allowed us to finally start reading the few surviving texts and the inscriptions on monuments. Each new translation brings a revelation, but it also underscores the magnitude of the loss. We are forever trying to understand a magnificent symphony by listening to just 4 of its notes. This deliberate erasure shows that the destruction of knowledge isn't always a byproduct of war. Sometimes it is the very objective. It raises a profound question that connects these ancient libraries to our modern world. If knowledge can be physically destroyed and culturally suppressed, what other methods have empires used to control the narrative and shape what we are allowed to know? Yet, even amidst the systematic campaigns of burning and banning, not all knowledge was lost to the flames. Some was carefully, quietly hidden away, buried with the desperate hope that a future, more understanding generation might one day bring it back into the light. This is the remarkable story of the Nag Hammadi Library, a collection that proves that sometimes the most revolutionary ideas are not erased but merely lie dormant, waiting for their moment to return. In December of 1945, an Egyptian farmer named Muhammad al-Saman was digging for fertile soil near the town of Nag Hammadi. His hoe struck something hard, not a rock, but a large, sealed clay jar buried at the foot of a cliff. He was initially hesitant to open it, fearing a jinn or spirit might be inside. But the possibility of treasure overcame his fear, and when he broke the jar open, he found not gold, but 13 ancient leather-bound books, papyrus codices stitched together and filled with a strange handwritten text. These were not ordinary books. They were a time capsule, a secret library hidden away around the 4th century CE, precisely to avoid the fate of the texts we've already discussed. The codices contained 52 separate texts, most of them entirely unknown to the modern world. They were written in Coptic, the language of Egyptian Christians at the time, but they were translations of even older Greek manuscripts. And their content was nothing short of explosive. These were Gnostic Gospels, alternative accounts of Jesus' teachings and the meaning of his life that had been viciously suppressed by the early Christian church as it solidified its power and orthodoxy. For nearly 1600 years, the only knowledge of these texts came from the furious criticisms written by the church fathers who condemned them. We only knew the Gnostic ideas through the words of their enemies, who portrayed them as dangerous heresy. Now, suddenly, we had the actual books, allowing these silenced voices to speak for themselves after more than a millennium. The worldview presented in these texts was radically different from the one that became mainstream Christianity, where orthodoxy emphasized faith, doctrine, and the authority of the church. The Gnostic writings focused on inner, personal knowledge. The word gnosis itself means knowledge, a direct, mystical understanding of the divine. They often presented a more complex cosmology, suggesting that the material world was not created by a supreme, benevolent God but by a lesser, imperfect being, and that the human spirit was a divine spark trapped in this world, yearning to return to its true home. Jesus, in these texts, was less a savior who died for humanity's sins, and more a spiritual guide who came to awaken people to this hidden knowledge within themselves. The Gospel of Thomas, for instance, opens with the saying, "Whoever discovers the interpretation of these sayings will not taste death." It's a collection of cryptic, philosophical teachings, not a narrative of his life and crucifixion. The burial of this library was undoubtedly an act of preservation by monks who cherished these forbidden texts. As the Orthodox Church grew in political power, it began to systematically root out and destroy any competing interpretations. Possessing such a book could mean excommunication or worse. So, rather than see their sacred library consigned to a bonfire like the Maya codices, a community of monks likely made the heartbreaking decision to bury their most treasured volumes in the desert, trusting the dry sand to protect them. They could never have imagined it would take 16 centuries for that trust to be repaid. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library fundamentally transformed our understanding of early Christianity. It revealed a movement that was far more diverse, creative, and intellectually vibrant than the singular, monolithic tradition that eventually triumphed. It showed us that what we call orthodoxy was just one version of Christianity that won out through political maneuvering and the suppression of its rivals. The burial of this cache was a direct response to the kind of ideological control empires and institutions exert, not through violent conquest, but through the careful curation of acceptable truth and the silencing of everything else. This moves us from the blunt force of the torch to a more subtle, and in some ways more insidious, form of control. But the physical destruction of libraries by fire or conquest represents only the most dramatic form of erasure. A far more subtle, and in many ways more effective, strategy has been the quiet, systematic work of censorship and selective preservation. This is the process where an empire, rather than burning every book it finds, instead makes a calculated decision about which knowledge is worthy of survival and which must be allowed to fade into oblivion. It's a form of intellectual gardening where the state actively cultivates the ideas that support its power and uproots any competing shoots of thought, leaving behind a landscape that appears lush and complete, but is in fact a carefully controlled monoculture. This approach doesn't leave a river of ink or a pile of ashes. It creates a silence so profound we often don't even realize something is missing. Consider the vast public library system of ancient Rome, a network of knowledge designed to showcase the empire's cultural supremacy. These libraries were not meant to be universal archives like Alexandria. They were instruments of propaganda, works that celebrated the emperor, detailed Roman military victories, or promoted state-sanctioned philosophies like Stoicism were meticulously copied by armies of scribes, ensuring their wide dissemination and survival. But what of the dissenting voices, texts that criticized imperial policy, advocated for rival political systems, or contained philosophies deemed disruptive were simply denied this privilege? They weren't necessarily burned en masse, but they were excluded from the official channels of preservation. Without state support for copying, these scrolls, written on fragile papyrus or parchment, had a limited lifespan. They sat in private collections vulnerable to moisture, pests, and decay, and when they crumbled, they took their challenging ideas with them. The result is that our view of the Roman world is heavily filtered through a pro-Roman lens, disproportionately shaped by the authors the empire chose to immortalize. We have a vast record of what the state wanted us to know, and only fragments and references hinting at the vibrant debates it sought to suppress. This model of control through curation was perfected centuries later during the Spanish Inquisition with the creation of the infamous Index Librorum Prohibitorum, the Index of Forbidden Books. This was censorship made bureaucratic and efficient. The Church, in partnership with the Crown, didn't have to find and burn every copy of a dangerous text. They simply had to make ownership or reading a serious crime. The index listed thousands of books deemed heretical, immoral, or politically dangerous, ranging from scientific works that challenged a geocentric universe to novels and philosophical tracts that promoted ideas counter to Catholic doctrine. The effect was to create a powerful psychological barrier. It forced scholars to self-censor, to avoid certain lines of inquiry altogether, and it severely limited the intellectual diet of an entire society for generations. The knowledge in those books didn't disappear in a single fiery spectacle. It was slowly starved of an audience, confined to the shadows, its influence curtailed. This form of erasure is insidious because it creates the illusion of a complete historical record. The library shelves seem full, but they are full of only approved texts. The gaps are invisible, the silence is unheard. We are left with a history that feels continuous but is in fact a curated exhibit shaped by the unseen hand of the censor. This legacy continues to shape our understanding of the past today, as historical archives themselves are not neutral repositories of fact. They are collections built by people with biases, priorities, and blind spots. The documents that were saved, catalogued, and deemed important enough to preserve often reflect the perspectives of the powerful, the governments, the churches, the wealthy families. The letters, diaries, and records of marginalized groups, of dissidents, of the conquered, were frequently seen as having no lasting value and were discarded or never created in the first place due to illiteracy imposed by those in power. This means our primary sources for understanding history are often inherently skewed, telling a story from the top down. Recognizing this selective preservation is not about dismissing history, but about reading it more critically, about learning to listen for the echoes in the silence and to question the completeness of every narrative we inherit. It forces us to ask not just what is in the archive, but what is missing and why. And this critical awareness becomes our most powerful tool as we enter a new era, one where modern technology is performing miracles, bringing whispers back from the void and recovering what was once thought lost forever. Yet for all the power of empires to burn, ban, and bury, a new and powerful force is emerging to counter historical amnesia, modern technology. We are now witnessing a digital resurrection, a remarkable era where advanced tools are allowing us to peer through the ashes of time and recover whispers from the void. This isn't science fiction. It's the painstaking work of scholars and scientists who are using cutting-edge innovations to read the unreadable. Take the tragic Library of Herculaneum, a Roman town buried alongside Pompeii during the eruption of Mount Vesuvius. The intense heat carbonized hundreds of ancient scrolls, turning them into blackened, brittle lumps that would crumble at the slightest touch. For centuries, they were considered utterly lost, their contents frozen behind a charred shell. But now, with the aid of high-resolution CT scanners and sophisticated artificial intelligence algorithms, researchers are virtually unrolling these scrolls. By analyzing the microscopic differences in the carbonized papyrus and the ancient ink, the AI can detect the ghostly imprint of letters, slowly reconstructing texts that haven't been seen by human eyes in nearly 2,000 years. This is like developing a new sense, one that allows us to perceive what was previously imperceptible. This technological magic doesn't stop with fire-damaged scrolls. It also breathes life back into texts that were deliberately scrubbed away. In the medieval period, parchment was an expensive commodity. To save money, scribes would often take older, unwanted manuscripts and scrape or wash off the ink, then write a new text on the newly cleared surface. These recycled books are called palimpsests, and for centuries the original writing lay hidden beneath the surface, seemingly erased forever. But today, through a process called multispectral imaging, we can recover these lost words. By photographing the pages under different wavelengths of light, from ultraviolet to infrared, and then using algorithms to enhance the contrast, the older, fainter ink, which penetrated deeper into the parchment, glows back to life. Projects like the Sinai Palimpsests project have used this very technology on ancient manuscripts from St. Catherine's Monastery in Egypt, one of the world's oldest continuously operating libraries. Their work has revealed a stunning array of erased texts, forgotten speeches by the Athenian orator Hyperides, previously unknown treatises by the Greek physician Galen, and even early Christian writings that had been overwritten with later liturgical texts. Each discovery is like finding a secret message hidden in plain sight, a double history contained within a single book. Beyond recovering individual texts, technology is also allowing us to virtually rebuild the great libraries themselves. While we can never physically restore the Library of Alexandria, we can create its digital equivalent. International collaborations are now underway to create vast online archives that gather digital copies of all surviving texts from the ancient world, regardless of which museum or university library currently holds the physical fragment. A piece of a play by Sophocles in Oxford can be digitally reunited with another fragment in Berlin, and both can be linked to commentaries written by scholars in Alexandria centuries ago. This creates a networked global library that transcends physical borders, reassembling the scattered pieces of humanity's intellectual heritage in a way that would have been the dream of the ancient Ptolemies. This democratization of access is perhaps the most powerful safeguard against future erasure. When knowledge is digitized and distributed across a global network, it becomes virtually impossible for any single authority to suppress it entirely. An idea once set free in the digital realm can be copied infinitely and stored in 1,000 different places simultaneously, creating a resilience that physical scrolls and codices never had. This progress fundamentally shifts the balance of power in the fight to preserve knowledge. For millennia, the advantage lay with those who sought to destroy, their actions swift and final. Now, the advantage is shifting to those who seek to recover and preserve. Our tools are becoming so sophisticated that they can even analyze documents without physically touching them, preserving their integrity for future generations. This technological revolution invites us to look at every damaged manuscript, every scrap of papyrus in a museum drawer, and every seemingly blank page in a medieval book not as an end but as a beginning. Each one is a locked box, and we are only just now forging the keys. It forces us to ask a thrilling question: what other lost masterpieces are waiting just beneath the surface, invisible to the naked eye but patiently awaiting the right technology to tell their stories once more? The recovery of these texts does more than just fill gaps in our history books. It actively rewrites them, challenging long-held assumptions and reminding us that the past is far more complex, diverse, and surprising than we ever knew. While the tragic tales of Alexandria and Baghdad often dominate our imagination, there is another, quieter story of survival that unfolded within the mighty walls of Constantinople. The Imperial Library of the Byzantine Empire doesn't carry the same mythical weight as its Egyptian predecessor, but its legacy is in many ways more remarkable because of its incredible endurance. For over 1,000 years, through the long decline of Rome and the turmoil of the so-called Dark Ages in Western Europe, this library stood as a vigilant guardian, a fortress not just of stone but of thought, protecting the fragile flame of ancient knowledge against the encroaching shadows. Founded by Emperor Constantius II in the 4th century CE, the library's mission was clear from the start: to gather and, most importantly, to preserve the intellectual treasures of the Greek and Roman world. As the Western Roman Empire crumbled, plunging Europe into centuries of fractured kingdoms and lost learning, the scribes and scholars in Constantinople were engaged in a monumental, continuous project of salvation. They weren't just storing scrolls, they were actively and meticulously copying them. Imagine the scene: in bustling scriptoriums, by the flickering light of oil lamps, generations of dedicated monks and scribes bent over parchments, their quills scratching out perfect replicas of the works of Plato, Aristotle, Homer, and countless others. This was a direct, unbroken chain of preservation, a lifeline thrown across the centuries. The library became the sole surviving ark carrying the complete corpus of classical philosophy, science, and literature, ensuring that these ideas would not be washed away by the tides of invasion and cultural collapse. This resilience was tested time and again. The city itself faced countless sieges from Persians, Arabs, and Bulgars. Fires, a constant threat in a city of wooden buildings, ravaged entire districts on multiple occasions, each time threatening the library's precious holdings. Yet, each time the collection was rebuilt, the texts recopied, the mission reaffirmed. The true strength of Constantinople's library wasn't just in its walls, but in its system, a deeply ingrained culture of preservation that saw the protection of this knowledge as a sacred duty to both God and civilization itself. This system ensured that even when physical copies were lost, the texts themselves lived on in duplicate manuscripts, scattered in monasteries and collections across the city, making the complete eradication of any single work nearly impossible. However, no fortress is impregnable forever. The library's most devastating blow did not come from a traditional enemy, but from those who claimed to be fellow Christians. In 1204, the Fourth Crusade, wildly diverted from its mission to reclaim Jerusalem, descended upon Constantinople. What followed was not a heroic conquest but a brutal, three-day sack by Crusader forces who looted, vandalized, and burned the greatest Christian city in the world. The library was not spared. Crusaders, seeking gold and relics, tore apart illuminated manuscripts for their jeweled covers and burned countless volumes of pagan philosophy they deemed heretical or worthless. It was an act of staggering cultural vandalism that erased untold numbers of unique texts, including historical chronicles, scientific works, and literary masterpieces that existed nowhere else on Earth. The loss was a wound from which the library, and indeed the entire Byzantine Empire, never fully recovered. And yet, even this catastrophe did not spell absolute doom. The resilience built over centuries meant that while much was destroyed, much also survived, protected in hidden caches or distant monasteries. The true, enduring impact of the Imperial Library of Constantinople was felt centuries later. In 1453, when the city finally fell to the Ottoman Turks, a flood of Greek scholars fled westward, carrying with them precious manuscripts saved from the wreckage. These texts, arriving in Italy and beyond, became the very fuel for the European Renaissance. The works of the ancient Greeks, preserved and perfected by Byzantine scribes for a millennium, were reintroduced to a Europe that had forgotten them, igniting a rebirth of art, science, and humanist thought. The library's ultimate triumph was not in its own survival, but in its role as a bridge, successfully passing the torch of knowledge across a 1,000-year gap in history. This story offers a crucial counterpoint to the narratives of total loss. It shows us that erasure is rarely absolute. Knowledge possesses a stubborn resilience. It finds ways to persist, often in the most unlikely of places, carried forward by the quiet, determined efforts of individuals who understand its value. The legacy of Constantinople is one of hope, a testament to the fact that even when empires fall and libraries burn, ideas have a way of enduring, waiting patiently in the margins for their moment to return and illuminate the world once more. This tenacity forces us to confront a deeper question that goes beyond the physical survival of texts. What does the very act of losing such vast repositories of thought do to us, not just as students of history, but as a species trying to understand our own place in the universe? These acts of erasure, from the bonfires of Mani to the silent neglect of Roman censors, force us to confront a deeply unsettling ethical question that echoes across the centuries. Who exactly gets to decide what is worth knowing? The systematic destruction of libraries was never just about the loss of information. It was the ultimate act of intellectual colonization, a violent imposition of a single, monolithic worldview upon the rich tapestry of human thought. When an empire or an institution appoints itself the arbiter of truth, declaring certain ideas too dangerous, too heretical, or simply too inconvenient to be preserved, it doesn't just burn paper, it annihilates potential futures. It forecloses on entire avenues of scientific inquiry, silences philosophical debates before they can even begin, and robs future generations of the diverse perspectives necessary for true progress. This creates a cultural and intellectual monoculture where only the stories and ideas that serve the powerful are allowed to flourish, and all others are treated as weeds to be pulled. This is far from a relic of ancient history. The same impulse that led a friar to burn Maya codices manifests today in modern book bans that seek to remove certain voices from school libraries, in state-sponsored internet censorship that walls off citizens from global conversations, and in the relentless pressure to silence dissident journalists and academics. The tools have evolved, but the objective remains hauntingly familiar: to control the narrative by limiting the range of acceptable discourse. The recovery of these lost libraries, from the Nag Hammadi codices to the digitally unrolled scrolls of Herculaneum, serves as a powerful antidote to this impulse. Each rediscovered text is a testament to the resilience of suppressed ideas and a stark reminder that our current understanding of history, science, and even spirituality is incomplete and has been deliberately shaped by forces that had a vested interest in its incompleteness. This historical reckoning challenges us to look critically at our own institutions of memory. How do we, in the present day, build our archives? Whose stories are we prioritizing for preservation, and whose are we, perhaps unconsciously, allowing to fade? The work of modern librarians, archivists, and historians is increasingly focused on this very question, striving to create more inclusive and representative collections. This means actively seeking out and preserving the records of marginalized communities, indigenous cultures, and political dissidents, the voices that have traditionally been excluded from the official record. It's an effort to build a collective memory that reflects the true diversity of human experience, not just the victor's version of events. This isn't about rewriting history, but about finally reading it in its full, complex, and often contradictory entirety. Ultimately, the ethical dimension calls for a renewed commitment to two universal values: intellectual freedom and cultural preservation. It argues that knowledge is not the property of any one group, nation, or ideology, but a common heritage of all humanity. To willfully destroy or suppress it is a crime against that shared inheritance. Protecting this heritage requires vigilance, as the forces of censorship and erasure are perennial. It means advocating for the freedom to publish, to research, and to access information without fear. It means supporting the digitization and global distribution of knowledge to safeguard it against any single point of failure. And on a personal level, it invites us to become more critical consumers of information, to always ask what might be missing from the story we're being told, and to actively seek out the perspectives that others might wish to keep in the shadows. The legacy of the libraries that were lost is a permanent warning, but also a permanent inspiration, a call to build a world where knowledge is guarded not by gatekeepers but by guardians. The true cost of these vanished libraries is measured not just in the beauty of lost poetry or the intrigue of forgotten histories, but in the tangible, centuries-long delay of human progress. When we speak of the great setbacks in science and the humanities, we are often speaking directly of the contents of those burned and banned books. Consider the staggering case of Aristarchus of Samos, an ancient Greek astronomer who, in the 3rd century BCE, proposed a heliocentric model of the universe, arguing that the Earth and other planets revolved around the Sun. His work was known, studied, and debated within the walls of the Library of Alexandria. But with the library's decline and eventual destruction, his revolutionary idea effectively vanished from the Western intellectual tradition. It wasn't rediscovered until over 1700 years later, forcing figures like Copernicus and Galileo to essentially start from scratch, battling entrenched dogma to prove an idea that had already been conceived and documented millennia before. The loss of that single thread of thought arguably set back astronomy by more than 1,000 years. This pattern of catastrophic delay repeated itself across countless disciplines. The meticulous medical encyclopedias of the Islamic Golden Age, compiled by physicians like al-Razi and Ibn Sina, contained vast knowledge on surgery, infectious disease, and pharmacology that was far in advance of anything in medieval Europe. While some of these texts eventually trickled into the West through translations, many were lost entirely in the Mongol destruction of centers like Baghdad. Had that knowledge been seamlessly integrated rather than fragmented and delayed, the trajectory of European medicine, and by extension, global public health, might have accelerated dramatically, potentially saving millions of lives. Historians of science are left with a landscape full of frustrating dead ends and mysterious leaps, often because the foundational texts that connected one discovery to the next were the very ones targeted for erasure. For modern scholars, this legacy of loss creates a perpetual detective story, one where the evidence is composed of fragments, whispers, and shadows. They are forced to work with a patchwork record, piecing together history from passing mentions in surviving books, scattered inscriptions, and the frustratingly incomplete references of authors who had access to libraries we can only dream of. A historian of ancient philosophy might spend a career analyzing a single sentence from a later commentator who briefly summarizes a lost work by a pre-Socratic thinker, trying to extrapolate an entire worldview from a cryptic footnote. An archaeologist might unearth a papyrus fragment containing a few lines of a previously unknown play by Sophocles, its full meaning and brilliance forever out of reach because the rest of the text is ash. This is the academic reality of living in the wake of intellectual annihilation, forever knowing that the most important piece of the puzzle is likely gone for good. Yet, this is also what makes every modern discovery so electrifying and transformative. The unearthing of a single lost text can send seismic waves through entire academic fields, forcing a wholesale re-evaluation of what we thought we knew. The Nag Hammadi library didn't just add a few new chapters to early Christian history. It completely rewrote the book, revealing a vibrant, diverse, and intellectually daring religious landscape that the Orthodox tradition had successfully hidden for centuries. Similarly, the ongoing work to digitally unroll the carbonized Herculaneum scrolls promises the potential recovery of entire lost works of Greek philosophy and Latin literature. Each new word deciphered from those blackened lumps could fundamentally alter our understanding of ancient Epicurean science or Roman poetry. These recoveries are more than just academic curiosities. They are acts of restorative justice for history itself, returning voices to the chorus that were forcibly silenced. This underscores an urgent modern imperative. The preservation of knowledge is not a passive act of archiving, but an active defense against ideological attacks. The same impulses that led to the burning of the Maya Codices or the suppression of the Gnostic Gospels are still very much alive in the world today, manifesting as book bans, internet censorship, and the targeted destruction of cultural heritage sites. Understanding the historical impact of lost libraries is our most powerful vaccine against this kind of intellectual virus. It teaches us that when we allow knowledge to be controlled, curated, or destroyed by any single authority, we are not just losing the past, we are impoverishing our future, robbing generations yet unborn of the tools, ideas, and perspectives they will need to solve the challenges of their time. And in the face of this relentless pressure to forget, the most revolutionary act has always been the quiet, courageous decision of individuals to remember, to hide, and to preserve. Amidst the roaring flames and the clamor of conquest, there were always those who refused to let the light of knowledge be extinguished. While empires mobilized armies to destroy, individuals summoned a different kind of courage, the quiet, defiant bravery of the preserver. These unsung heroes, often facing unimaginable personal risk, became the hidden guardians of humanity's collective memory, ensuring that even in the darkest hours, embers of wisdom survived to be rekindled. Their stories are not just footnotes to the main narrative of destruction. They are a powerful counter-narrative of resilience, proving that the human spirit's drive to safeguard truth can be as formidable as any force of oppression. Consider the chaos and terror of the Mongol siege of Baghdad. As the great house of wisdom fell and its contents were consigned to the Tigris, the common telling focuses on the totality of the loss. But history is rarely so absolute. It was in this maelstrom of violence that individuals like the polymath Ibn al-Nafis are said to have acted. A physician and theologian, al-Nafis is famed for his discovery of pulmonary circulation, a groundbreaking correction to the ancient theories of Galen. Legend suggests that during the sack of the city, he and others like him managed to smuggle out critical medical texts, hiding scrolls within their robes or securing them on donkeys to be transported to safety in Damascus or Cairo. This was not an organized evacuation but a desperate personal gamble. The knowledge these texts contained advanced surgical techniques, detailed pharmacological studies, and intricate anatomical diagrams did not vanish entirely from the earth. Instead, it traveled secretly along trade routes and into the hands of scholars who would continue its study, eventually influencing the medical revolutions of Renaissance Europe centuries later. One man's courageous act in a moment of terror created a thread of continuity across continents and eras. This same pattern of clandestine preservation unfolded an ocean away. We spoke of Diego de Landa's Auto da Fe in Mani, a bonfire intended to be a final punctuation mark on Maya intellectual life. But the Maya people did not simply surrender their heritage. In the face of systematic eradication, scribes and community leaders made the perilous decision to hide their most sacred texts. They wrapped codices in protective cloth and sealed them in jars, carrying them deep into the limestone caves considered entrances to the underworld, or burying them beneath the floors of their homes. This was an incredibly dangerous act of resistance. Possession of such a text after the decrees banning them was punishable by torture or death. The 4 codices that survived to the modern day, the Dresden, Madrid, Paris, and Grolier codices, are almost certainly not the only ones that were hidden. They are merely the ones that were found. They exist today not by accident, but because of the calculated bravery of individuals who believed the knowledge they contained was worth more than their own safety. They entrusted their library to the earth itself, hoping the land would protect what their people could not. Within the scriptoriums of medieval European monasteries, a more subtle form of resistance was also at work. As Orthodox authorities tightened their control over acceptable religious texts, monks who encountered suppressed or heterodox writings sometimes faced a moral dilemma. Rather than destroy a unique, ancient manuscript, some chose to preserve it through a clever, time-consuming subterfuge. They would carefully scrape the ink from a page of durable parchment, creating a palimpsest, a recycled page. On the surface, they would copy an approved text like a book of hours or a common liturgical work, but hidden just beneath, the original, forbidden writing remained, faintly visible to anyone who knew to look for it. In other cases, scribes might secretly bind a suppressed tract into the back of a large, approved volume, hoping it would escape notice during inspections. These acts required immense patience and skill, a silent protest wielded with a quill and a pot of ink. They were playing a long game, betting that future generations, with different eyes and different tools, would be able to recover the truth they had been compelled to hide. The motivations of these preservers were as diverse as their methods. For some, it was a profound scholarly duty, a belief that knowledge itself was sacred and its destruction an unforgivable sin. For others, it was an act of cultural or national patriotism, a refusal to let an invading power erase their people's identity. For many, it was likely a deeply personal connection to the content itself, a medical text that could save lives, a spiritual guide that offered comfort, a historical chronicle that told the story of their ancestors. Their collective story adds a crucial layer of hope to our exploration, transforming a history of loss into a parallel history of salvation. It reminds us that the arc of history, while often bent by the powerful, is also shaped by the courageous choices of ordinary individuals. They are the reason we have anything to recover at all, and it is precisely their legacy that modern science has now embraced, using astonishing new tools to fulfill their ancient hope by uncovering the physical evidence of the libraries they tried to save. And so the work continues, not just in the digital realm, but with trowel and brush in hand, as archaeologists around the world literally unearth the physical evidence of these lost archives. Each new discovery is a direct rebuttal to history's vandals, a tangible piece of the puzzle falling back into place. Take, for instance, the remarkable find in 2015 in northern Iraq. Amidst the turmoil and conflict that has ravaged the region, a team excavating the ancient Assyrian city of Nimrud made an astonishing discovery deep within a palace, a library. But this was no ordinary collection. This was the royal archive of King Tiglath-Pileser III, containing hundreds of pristine cuneiform tablets. These weren't just royal decrees or tax records. They were a comprehensive snapshot of an empire's mind, containing treaties, religious rituals, scholarly texts, and even what appears to be an early manual for administering the vast Assyrian state. To hold one of these tablets is to hold the very filing system of an empire that dominated the ancient world, a system of knowledge management written in clay that was meant to last for millennia. Its discovery, in an area repeatedly threatened by modern destruction, feels like a defiant message from the past, insisting that its voice will not be silenced. Perhaps the most tantalizing archaeological treasure hunt of all continues in southern Italy, at the Villa of the Papyri in Herculaneum. As you'll recall, this Roman seaside estate was buried in the same volcanic eruption that consumed Pompeii, and its extensive library was carbonized by the superheated gases of Mount Vesuvius. For centuries, these scrolls were considered beautiful but unreadable artifacts, their contents locked away behind a charred, brittle shell. But recent excavations have revealed that the villa's main library, discovered in the 18th century, was likely not the only one. Archaeologists now believe there is a second, much larger library still waiting to be found within the untouched lower levels of the villa. The potential is staggering. The already recovered scrolls are largely works of Greek philosophy from the Epicurean school. A new library could contain anything: lost histories, Latin poetry, scientific texts, or even personal letters that would revolutionize our understanding of the Roman elite's intellectual life. Each new square meter of earth carefully removed brings us closer to what could be the single greatest recovery of ancient literature in modern history. It's a slow, meticulous process, a race against time and the elements, driven by the thrilling possibility that the next stroke of a brush could reveal another doorway to a forgotten world. What makes these archaeological finds so profoundly important is that they give us more than just the texts themselves. They provide the entire ecosystem in which that knowledge lived. We don't just get a play by Sophocles, we get the very shelf it was stored on, in the room where it was read, in the building that formed part of a city's intellectual landscape. The Assyrian tablets were found in their original storage jars, neatly organized by subject, allowing us to understand how Mesopotamian librarians categorized the world. The carbonized scrolls in Herculaneum were found with their wooden reading stands and even the remains of the shelves they sat on, frozen in a moment of use. This context is priceless. It transforms these objects from isolated relics into pieces of a living, breathing culture. We learn what knowledge they valued enough to write down, how they preserved it, and who had access to it. We see the physical infrastructure of thought, making the abstract concept of a library suddenly, powerfully real. This meticulous work of recovery is a powerful form of justice, a way of defiantly answering the historical acts of erasure we've chronicled. Every tablet pulled from the Iraqi soil is a victory over the modern-day iconoclasts who sought to erase history. Every scroll virtually unrolled from Herculaneum is a triumph over the volcanic fury that sought to entomb it forever. Archaeology, in this sense, is the opposite of destruction. It is a patient, respectful dialogue with the past, asking it to reveal its secrets on its own terms. It acknowledges that our historical record is fragmented and incomplete, but it refuses to accept that those gaps are permanent. With every discovery, large or small, we are actively reversing the erasure, pulling another thread of the vast tapestry of human knowledge back into the light. And this ongoing conversation with the past forces us to look to the future, to consider the libraries we are building today and how we can ensure they survive for the millennia to come. But even as empires perfected the art of destroying physical libraries, they often underestimated the resilience of a far more ancient and deeply human technology, memory. In countless cultures around the world, where written records were targeted for eradication or never existed in the first place, knowledge found a sanctuary not in clay or papyrus, but in the human voice. Oral traditions became a powerful, living counterweight to the torch and the decree, preserving histories, philosophies, and scientific understandings through the sacred acts of storytelling, song, and ritual. This was knowledge woven into the very fabric of community identity, passed deliberately from one generation to the next in a continuous, unbroken chain of remembrance that proved remarkably difficult for outside forces to completely sever. We see this resilience vividly in the aftermath of the Maya Codices' destruction. While Friar Diego de Landa's bonfire in Mani was a catastrophic blow, it did not entirely erase Maya intellectual culture. Aspects of their sophisticated cosmology, their intricate calendar systems, and their historical narratives survived not on bark paper, but in the stories told by elders, the dialogues preserved in ceremonial dramas, and the chants recited during religious festivals. These oral archives, maintained through centuries of colonial pressure, ensured that core elements of their worldview endured. Modern scholars and Maya communities themselves have worked to correlate these spoken histories with the glyphs deciphered from the few surviving codices, finding remarkable consistencies. The spoken word acted as a backup, a parallel knowledge system that safeguarded what the written word could not. This phenomenon is a global one, showcasing the incredible ingenuity of cultural preservation. In West Africa, the griots, master oral historians and storytellers, have for centuries served as the living libraries of their societies. They memorize and perform epic histories that can span generations, detailing genealogies, legal precedents, and the diplomatic intricacies of ancient kingdoms. A griot's memory is a meticulously trained instrument, capable of holding thousands of lines of poetry and prose with exacting precision. European colonial powers, who often dismissed such oral systems as primitive, failed to recognize that they were encountering sophisticated, alternative methods of record-keeping that had successfully preserved complex knowledge for far longer than many European archives had even existed. Perhaps one of the most profound examples comes from indigenous Australian cultures and their concept of songlines. These are not merely songs in the Western sense. They are intricate oral maps, legal documents, and historical records all woven together. A songline is a sequence of verses that describes a path across the land, naming every waterhole, mountain, and geological feature in order. By memorizing and singing these songs, which can be hundreds of miles long, people could navigate vast stretches of the Australian continent with precise accuracy. But more than that, the songs encode the stories of the ancestral beings who created the landscape during the Dreamtime, embedding law, morality, and spiritual belief into the very description of the country. This fusion of navigation, history, and law into an oral tradition represents a breathtakingly efficient and resilient form of knowledge preservation, one that is intimately tied to the land itself. Yet, for all their resilience, these oral archives face their own modern vulnerabilities. They are not static records, but living traditions that require active, continuous participation to survive. The forces of globalization, cultural assimilation, and the erosion of indigenous languages pose a grave threat. When a language becomes extinct, it doesn't just take words with it. It can erase entire worldviews and systems of knowledge encoded in those words. The passing of an elder without a successor to whom they can pass on their stories represents a loss as final as any library fire. Recognizing the immense value of these oral traditions compels us to expand our definition of a library. A library is not just a building with books. It can be a person, a ceremony, a song cycle repeated for millennia. It challenges the often unquestioned supremacy of the written text and invites us to appreciate the diverse and powerful forms that human memory can take. This broader understanding is crucial as we confront the sobering reality that the impulse to control knowledge is not a relic of ancient history, but a very present and evolving practice. This same drive to control the narrative, to shape what a society is permitted to know, has not vanished with the advent of the digital age. It has simply upgraded its toolkit. Where ancient empires deployed the torch and the decree, modern powers wield algorithms, firewalls, and disinformation campaigns, achieving a scale and efficiency of erasure that previous generations could scarcely have imagined. The objective, however, remains hauntingly familiar: to solidify control by dominating the collective memory and the accepted version of truth. Governments can now restrict internet access during periods of civil unrest, effectively plunging an entire population into an information blackout. They can systematically erase digital archives, wiping clean any historical records or cultural databases that contradict the state-sanctioned narrative. And perhaps most insidiously, they can flood the information ecosystem with strategically crafted misinformation, creating a fog of doubt so thick that citizens no longer know what to believe, ultimately causing them to distrust all information sources except the one provided by the authority itself. We see this modern-day biblioclasm playing out with devastating clarity in contemporary conflict zones. The deliberate targeting of libraries and museums in Syria and Iraq by extremist groups was a calculated strategy of cultural genocide, a direct and brutal echo of the Mongol sack of Baghdad. But beyond the physical destruction of ancient sites like Palmyra or Mosul, a parallel digital erasure often occurs. Opposition websites, independent news archives, and digital repositories of evidence documenting human rights abuses are systematically taken offline through cyberattacks or state-ordered deletion. This creates a double loss: the annihilation of the physical artifact and the silencing of the digital record that could bear witness to that loss. It's a chillingly effective way to ensure that, even if the rubble is one day cleared, the memory of what was destroyed and who was responsible becomes increasingly difficult to access and verify. Yet the threat to our digital knowledge isn't always so malicious or dramatic. A more passive, insidious form of loss looms in the form of digital decay. Think of the floppy disks in your attic, the old blog posts on a defunct platform, the early websites that shaped internet culture. Countless terabytes of our collective recent history are stored on formats that are rapidly becoming unreadable. As software evolves and hardware becomes obsolete, files become corrupted, links break, and storage media physically degrades. This isn't just about losing nostalgic personal photos. It's about the potential loss of vast swaths of scientific data, governmental records, and cultural production from the late 20th and early 21st centuries. Unlike a clay tablet that can sit in the desert for millennia and still be deciphered, a hard drive has a shockingly short lifespan. We are creating more information than any civilization in history, but we are building our library on astonishingly fragile foundations, risking a digital dark age where future historians will find a gaping void in the record of our time. Understanding the historical patterns of knowledge destruction provides us with a crucial framework for confronting these modern challenges. It teaches us that the impulse to control information is a perennial feature of power, and that vigilance is not a one-time effort but a continuous responsibility. The lessons from Alexandria, Baghdad, and Mani compel us to build robust, decentralized systems for preserving digital knowledge, to create multiple copies, use open source and non-proprietary file formats, and support independent digital archives that are resilient to both political pressure and technological obsolescence. This historical context transforms digital preservation from a technical niche into a profound act of cultural defense, a direct continuation of the same struggle that has played out for millennia between those who seek to erase and those who are determined to remember. And this relentless assault on collective memory, whether by fire or by firewall, inflicts a deep and lasting wound that goes far beyond the loss of data. It strikes at the very core of our human identity, our sense of belonging, and our understanding of who we are. The true cost of a burned library extends far beyond the loss of parchment and ink. It strikes at the very soul of a people, severing the vital connections that bind a community to its own past. This isn't just about missing information. It's about the profound psychological wound known as cultural trauma. Imagine the collective disorientation that sets in when the stories your grandparents told are suddenly declared illegitimate, when the songs that guided your ancestors are silenced, and when the very written proof of your civilization's scientific and philosophical achievements is reduced to ash. This creates a deep and lingering identity crisis, a feeling of being unmoored in time, disconnected from the generations that came before, and uncertain about the cultural foundations upon which to build the future. We can see the stark evidence of this trauma in the struggles of many indigenous communities around the world. For decades, government policies and colonial school systems actively suppressed native languages and oral traditions, effectively outlawing the very tools used to transmit cultural knowledge from one generation to the next. The message was clear and brutal. Your history is not history. Your stories are mere myths. Your way of knowing the world is invalid. This systematic devaluation creates a painful rift within communities, where elders hold fragments of knowledge that the younger generation, often educated exclusively in the colonizer's language and worldview, can no longer access or fully understand. The loss is felt not as a simple gap in a history book, but as a personal ache, a lingering sense that something essential is missing from one's own identity, even if it's difficult to name exactly what that something is. This is why the modern work of recovering lost knowledge is so much more than an academic exercise in filling gaps on a timeline. It is an act of profound cultural and psychological healing. When a long-suppressed Maya codex is finally deciphered and returned to its community, it isn't just a historical document, it is a validation. It is tangible proof that their ancestors were not primitive, but were brilliant astronomers, mathematicians, and storytellers. This reclamation restores agency, allowing a people to define themselves on their own terms, using their own sources, rather than being defined solely by the records of their conquerors. It provides a sense of continuity, rebuilding the bridge between past and present and allowing for a future built on a restored foundation of pride and self-knowledge. This emotional and psychological dimension adds a deep and urgent weight to the quest of historians and archaeologists. They are not simply treasure hunters, they are facilitators of recovery, helping to mend the torn fabric of collective memory. Every fragment of a scroll pieced together, every glyph deciphered on a clay tablet, represents a small step toward healing the trauma of erasure. It is a process that says to marginalized cultures, your history matters, your ancestors' achievements were real, and your identity is rooted in a rich and legitimate heritage. This restorative power transforms the technical process of excavation and translation into a deeply human endeavor, one that acknowledges that the greatest loss from a burned library is not the data it contained, but the human spirit it was meant to nourish. As we near the conclusion of our exploration, this understanding forces us to look up from the ancient ashes and ask what this all means for us, for humanity as a whole, and for the legacy we are building right now. The repeated tragedies of Alexandria, Baghdad, and Mani are not just stories of loss, they are a stark and urgent curriculum. They teach us that the preservation of knowledge can never be a passive act of simply storing information and hoping for the best. It must be a proactive, deliberate, and diversified strategy, a multi-layered defense system built with the hard-won wisdom of history. We now understand that true resilience lies not in building a single, invincible fortress for our collective memory, but in creating countless copies and distributing them across the globe, ensuring that no single point of failure can ever again erase a civilization's voice. This forward-looking approach transforms the grief of past tragedies into a powerful opportunity to future-proof our heritage. This modern defense system has several critical layers. The first is the continued, painstaking physical conservation of the original artifacts we still possess. This means climate-controlled museum vaults, restoration labs where experts mend fragile papyrus and parchment, and the protection of archaeological sites from both looting and the elements. But we know that physical objects are uniquely vulnerable to the very threats we've chronicled: fire, water, and deliberate destruction. This is where the digital revolution provides our most powerful new shield. Initiatives like the Internet Archive's Wayback Machine are conducting a continuous, global rescue mission, archiving billions of web pages to create a permanent record of our digital present, protecting it from simply disappearing when a website goes offline or a server fails. This is a direct technological answer to the age-old problem of decay and loss. Yet even digital data is not immortal. File formats become obsolete, hard drives fail, and the very platforms we use to store information can vanish. This is why the most cutting-edge preservation strategies embrace decentralization. Instead of storing the sum of human knowledge in one centralized server farm, the goal is to distribute it. Imagine a global network where copies of every important text, every crucial dataset, and every cultural treasure are held on thousands of independent servers and personal computers around the world, creating a system with no central point of control or failure. This is the principle behind projects like the Decentralized Web, or D-Web, which aims to create a more resilient and open internet. It is the ultimate safeguard against any modern empire or institution that might seek to control the narrative by seizing or deleting a central repository. By its very design, it ensures that knowledge, once released into this network, becomes practically impossible to eradicate completely. Alongside these technological solutions, there is a crucial philosophical shift, a growing commitment to open access. The lessons of history show us that when knowledge is hoarded by the powerful, locked away in royal libraries, or restricted to a privileged elite, it becomes a target and its survival is jeopardized. The modern movement to make scientific research, historical archives, and cultural materials freely available to everyone is a direct rebellion against this ancient model of control. When a farmer in rural India can access the same archaeological reports as a professor at Oxford, when a student in Brazil can download high-resolution scans of medieval manuscripts from a European library's website, we are building a world where knowledge is a common heritage, not a commodity. This widespread access itself becomes a form of preservation, as millions of eyes and minds now have a stake in protecting and understanding this shared inheritance. But perhaps the most profound lesson we've learned is to finally value the oldest preservation technology of all, the human voice. After centuries of privileging the written word, modern archivists and anthropologists are now working with indigenous communities to record and safeguard their oral traditions, recognizing these not as inferior histories but as sophisticated, living libraries. This involves supporting language revitalization projects, recording elders' stories, and treating these oral archives with the same respect given to a rare, ancient text. It acknowledges that some forms of knowledge are not meant to be locked in a vault but must be lived, performed, and passed down through generations to retain their meaning. Protecting these traditions is an essential part of the diversified strategy, ensuring that if one thread of preservation is broken, others will hold fast. This comprehensive, multi-pronged effort, physical, digital, decentralized, open, and oral, is our collective answer to the biblioclasm of the past, a promise to future generations that we will not let their inheritance be so easily lost again. And this global endeavor, this grand project of preservation, is not just the work of institutions and governments, it is a mission that every single one of us can join. This brings us to a truly empowering question. In the face of such immense historical loss, what can any one person possibly do? The answer lies in recognizing that the work of preservation is no longer confined to academics in ivory towers or archaeologists on distant digs. Today, thanks to technology and a growing global consciousness, each and every one of us can become a guardian against erasure, actively participating in what is perhaps the greatest recovery project in human history. This is the world of citizen science and public advocacy, a realm where your curiosity and your voice are powerful tools in the fight to reclaim our collective past. One of the most direct and impactful ways to contribute is by joining a digital citizen archaeology project. Imagine, from the comfort of your own home, you could help transcribe a 2,000-year-old papyrus fragment or catalog pottery shards from a recently excavated site. Platforms like Zooniverse host dozens of these initiatives, connecting everyday people with research institutions that need help processing massive amounts of data. For instance, the project Ancient Lives invites volunteers to transcribe Greek texts from Oxyrhynchus, a vast collection of papyri discovered in Egypt. There's no need to be an expert. The system trains you to recognize letters and symbols. Your clicks, combined with those of thousands of other volunteers, help researchers piece together fragments at a speed that would otherwise be impossible. You are not just passively learning about history, you are actively making it, helping to read a letter that hasn't been seen since the fall of Rome, or deciphering a recipe that was almost lost to time. It's a profound way to connect with the past and directly ensure its survival. Beyond the digital realm, many archaeological digs around the world welcome volunteers for a few weeks or months. While these opportunities often require a financial contribution to cover room and board, they offer an unparalleled, hands-on experience. You could be carefully sifting through soil in the shadow of a Roman villa, learning the meticulous process of excavation from professional archaeologists. This isn't about hunting for treasure, it's about the patient, methodical work of recovery, where every speck of dirt is potential context and every tiny find helps tell a larger story. The value isn't just in the labor you provide, but in the perspective you gain. You become an ambassador for this painstaking work, returning home with a first-hand understanding of its importance and a powerful story to share with your community. If getting your hands dirty isn't your style, your voice can be just as powerful an instrument for preservation. Cultural institutions like libraries, museums, and archives are often the first to face budget cuts during economic downturns. You can advocate for them by writing to your local representatives, supporting bond measures that fund their operations, and of course, by becoming a member or donor yourself. These are the modern-day equivalents of the great libraries, the repositories that safeguard our fragile heritage. Your support helps them maintain climate-controlled environments for ancient manuscripts, acquire new technologies for digital scanning, and host educational programs that inspire the next generation of guardians. Furthermore, in an age where book bans and digital censorship are on the rise, speaking out against the suppression of information is a direct continuation of the ancient struggle we've chronicled. Supporting intellectual freedom and open access to knowledge is a critical form of modern resistance against the age-old impulse to control the narrative. Perhaps the simplest yet most far-reaching action you can take is to become a storyteller. Every time you share a post about the discovery of a new palimpsest, explain the story of the House of Wisdom to a friend, or discuss the tragedy of the Maya Codices on social media, you are performing an act of preservation. You are raising awareness and building a global community that values this shared human heritage. Algorithms favor engagement, so by interacting with content from historians, archaeologists, and cultural institutions, you help amplify their message to a wider audience. You are quite literally keeping these stories in circulation, ensuring they remain part of our living conversation, and not just footnotes in a forgotten textbook. Ultimately, the most important shift is internal. It begins with learning these histories and discussing them, fostering a mindset that views knowledge not as a static fact to be consumed, but as a fragile, living legacy that requires active stewardship. Every conversation you have, every question you ask about whose story might be missing from a historical account, contributes to a culture of critical engagement and respect for the past. Your individual engagement might feel like a small thing, but history shows us that small actions, when multiplied by millions, create an irrepressible force. It was the courageous act of one person hiding a single codex that allowed it to survive for us to find centuries later. Today, our collective actions, clicking, advocating, donating, and sharing, form a distributed global network of preservation, a digital and social arc built by millions of hands, ensuring that the libraries empires tried to erase will never be forgotten again. This tendency to simplify history into a single dramatic event, often with a clear villain, is a powerful but misleading force in our collective imagination. Perhaps no story suffers more from this than the fate of the Library of Alexandria. The popular image is one of a single, catastrophic inferno, a towering pyre of human genius set ablaze by a specific conqueror, be it Julius Caesar, a Christian mob, or the Caliph Omar. This makes for a compelling narrative, but it obscures a far more complex and tragic truth. The downfall of Alexandria was not a sudden murder, but a long, slow death by 1,000 cuts. a gradual erosion over centuries where multiple actors from different empires and eras each played a part in its dismantling. Julius Caesar's accidental fire during his siege in 48 BCE did indeed damage a warehouse of scrolls, but it was far from the death blow. Subsequent Roman rulers, viewing the library's intellectual independence with suspicion, allowed it to fade through neglect and underfunding. Later, religious conflicts between pagans, Christians, and Jews led to targeted purges of certain texts deemed heretical. By the time the Arab conquest arrived in the 7th century, the library was likely a shadow of its former self, its final remnants scattered and lost not in a grand conflagration but through a slow, silent process of decay and dispersal. Understanding this complexity is crucial because it moves us away from a simple story of good versus evil and toward a more realistic model of how knowledge actually disappears, not always in a dramatic blaze, but often through the slow, insidious drip of indifference, bureaucratic neglect, and shifting political priorities. This pattern of oversimplification extends to other legendary libraries as well. We often envision knowledge loss as a deliberate, violent act of a malicious other, but the reality is that many repositories of wisdom were lost to far more mundane, yet equally devastating forces. The vast collections of the ancient Indus Valley civilization, for instance, left behind thousands of inscribed seals and tablets, but their written language remains completely undeciphered to this day. This wasn't because some invading army burned their libraries. Their cities show signs of gradual abandonment, likely due to climate change and the shifting course of rivers. Their knowledge didn't vanish in smoke. It was slowly buried by silt and sand, its meaning fading as the civilization that created it dispersed. Similarly, countless monastic libraries across medieval Europe saw their priceless classical texts slowly deteriorate. Parchment was scraped clean to be reused for more fashionable liturgical works, creating palimpsests where the original writing was obscured. This wasn't malicious destruction. It was a practical decision born from a lack of resources and a shifting cultural focus. The loss was just as total, but the cause was a slow decay of interest and the fragility of the materials themselves, not a targeted act of erasure. Dispelling these myths is not just an academic exercise in getting the facts straight. It is essential for how we approach the preservation of knowledge today. If we believe knowledge is only lost to dramatic acts of evil, we become complacent, thinking that simply avoiding war and arson is enough to protect our cultural heritage. The more nuanced truth teaches us that the greatest threats are often silent and systemic. Acid-rich paper slowly disintegrating in modern book archives, digital file formats becoming obsolete and unreadable, or the simple, passive neglect that allows a unique local history collection to be thrown out during a library renovation. By understanding that the Library of Alexandria fell as much from a lack of care as from any fire, we are forced to confront the quiet ways we are allowing our own collective knowledge to fade in the present day. It shifts the responsibility from simply condemning past villains to actively supporting the unglamorous, ongoing work of librarians, archivists, and conservators who fight against the constant tide of entropy. Appreciating this complexity also allows us to better recognize the true resilience of human ingenuity. The fact that so much knowledge survived at all is a testament not to indestructible libraries, but to the countless individuals who copied texts by hand, who hid forbidden manuscripts, who carried stories in their memories across generations, and who painstakingly translated works from one language to another, ensuring their passage through time. The survival of classical Greek knowledge, for instance, owes as much to Byzantine scribes and Islamic scholars as it does to any single library's walls. This more accurate history is ultimately more hopeful. It shows that while buildings can be burned and empires can fall, the human desire to preserve and transmit understanding is a relentless creative force that finds a way even in the darkest of times. It's a story of scattered seeds rather than a single unbreakable tree, and it forces us to look beyond the famous names and legendary sites to consider the enduring mystery of what other fragments of our story might still be out there, waiting silently in forgotten caves, buried beneath desert sands, or hidden in plain sight within the vaults of our greatest museums. And so we arrive at a thrilling crossroads where the documented past meets the boundless potential of what might still lie hidden. This enduring allure of the unknown, the possibility that undiscovered libraries are still waiting silently in the earth, is a powerful engine that fuels both cutting-edge scholarly research and our deepest public imagination. It's a reminder that for all we have recovered, the map of human history is still dotted with vast blank spaces marked only by legend and tantalizing whispers. These are not just gaps in our knowledge, they are invitations to wonder, to explore, and to dream. They suggest that the next great discovery, the one that could fundamentally rewrite a chapter of our story, might be just one shovel strike away, hidden in a cave, buried beneath a city, or waiting at the bottom of the sea. Some of the most persistent legends point to specific, almost mythical locations. For generations, stories have swirled about hidden chambers and secret passageways beneath the Great Sphinx of Giza. Could this ancient guardian be sitting atop a sealed hall of records, a library from a lost epoch containing the wisdom of a civilization that predates dynastic Egypt? While mainstream archaeology remains skeptical, the idea continues to captivate because it speaks to a universal hope that the greatest secrets of antiquity are not lost, but merely protected, waiting for the right moment to be revealed. Similarly, the dense, unexplored depths of the Amazon rainforest hold their own compelling mysteries. The tales of a magnificent, golden city known as El Dorado have evolved from a quest for treasure into a serious archaeological pursuit for evidence of large, sophisticated societies. If such cultures did flourish there, it stands to reason that they would have developed their own forms of record-keeping, perhaps libraries of knotted cords like the Inca Quipu, or texts written on perishable materials that vanished in the humid jungle, leaving only the ghost of their existence in oral traditions. The potential discovery of such an archive would instantly transform our understanding of the complexity and reach of pre-Columbian civilizations in the Americas. While these grand legends often capture the headlines, the more grounded and historically plausible possibilities are perhaps even more exciting. The discovery of the Nag Hammadi Library in 1945 was a powerful lesson that groups facing persecution will go to extraordinary lengths to preserve their most cherished texts. This was not an isolated incident. We know that the ancient Essene community at Qumran hid their sacred scrolls in jars within caves near the Dead Sea to protect them from the advancing Roman legions. This precedent makes it entirely reasonable to suspect that other communities across different times and places may have taken similar protective measures. Could there be other sealed jars hidden by early Christian sects, Gnostic circles, or even pagan philosophical schools, still resting in caves along the Nile Valley or buried in the ruins of forgotten monasteries? Each potential cache represents a frozen moment in time, a snapshot of a belief system or a school of thought that the mainstream tradition sought to marginalize. Finding just one more would be like recovering a missing voice in a centuries-old argument, allowing us to hear the full conversation for the very first time. This sense of wonder is far from a passive daydream. It is the very force that drives continued exploration and funds ambitious research projects. Modern archaeologists are no longer just digging with trowels. They are using satellite imagery to identify buried structures, deploying ground-penetrating radar to map subterranean chambers, and utilizing LiDAR technology to strip away the forest canopy and reveal the ghostly outlines of ancient cities hidden for millennia. Each of these tools is being employed in the active pursuit of these lost archives, a testament to the belief that the great libraries of the past did not all vanish. Some, we hope, are simply sleeping. This ongoing quest reminds us that history is not a closed book sitting on a shelf, its story complete and immutable. It is an ongoing excavation, a dynamic process of interpretation and reinterpretation, where every new fragment discovered has the potential to challenge long-held assumptions and force us to see the past in a startling new light. As we reflect on this journey from the ashes of Alexandria to the digital resurrection of Herculaneum, and now to the edge of these tantalizing unknowns, we must ask what these stories collectively mean for us today. They are more than just fascinating tales of adventure and loss. They are a profound commentary on the nature of knowledge itself. They teach us that what we accept as history is often merely the version that survived, a collection of voices that were fortunate enough to escape the myriad forces of destruction. The possibility of undiscovered libraries is the ultimate symbol of hope in the face of this reality. It is the belief that no act of erasure, whether by fire, zealotry, or neglect, can ever be entirely final. It affirms that the human drive to record, to understand, and to share our experiences is irrepressible. And it leaves us with a final, empowering thought, that the next great discovery might not rely on a team of experts in a distant land, but could begin with a curious mind, a questioning spirit, and the unwavering belief that there are always more pages to be found in the great, unfinished story of us. These stories of libraries erased by empires are far more than simple tales of loss. They are powerful testaments to the undeniable and enduring value of knowledge itself. From the legendary flames of Alexandria to the ink-blackened waters of the Tigris in Baghdad, from the smoldering ashes of the Maya codices in Mani to the silent, digital decay threatening our own era, we see a constant, relentless struggle playing out across the centuries. It is a battle between two opposing human impulses, the drive to control information, to shape a singular narrative that consolidates power, and the competing drive to preserve it, to ensure that the full, messy, and magnificent spectrum of human thought is allowed to survive and flourish. This is not a conflict confined to history books. It is the very undercurrent of our information age, a timeless dance between censorship and curiosity, between erasure and memory. When we engage in the recovery of these buried treasures, whether through the painstaking work of an archaeologist's brush, the sophisticated algorithms of a digital humanities project, or the dedicated listening to an elder's oral history, we are doing something truly profound. We are actively reclaiming lost voices from the silence imposed upon them. We are giving back to cultures the histories that were stolen, and we are gifting humanity chapters of its own story that were nearly ripped away forever. This work allows us to build a more complete, more nuanced, and infinitely richer understanding of our shared humanity. It reveals that our past is not a single, straight line of progress, but a complex web of interconnected ideas, discoveries, and perspectives, many of which were tragically suppressed but are now, miraculously, finding their way back to the light. As we move forward into an increasingly digital and fragmented future, let us carry with us the central lesson from these libraries of ash and memory, that knowledge is both incredibly fragile and astonishingly resilient. It can be wiped out in an afternoon by a single act of violence, yet it can also survive for millennia in a sealed jar, in a hidden cave, or in the steadfast rhythm of a recited poem. Its protection, therefore, is not a passive endeavor but an active responsibility, one that we all share. It falls to each of us to become guardians in our own way, whether by supporting our local libraries, advocating for net neutrality and open access, learning a fading language, or simply sharing these stories of resilience with others. Thank you for joining this journey into the shadows of the past. May the whispers of these lost libraries inspire you to listen more closely, to question more deeply, and to play your part in ensuring that the light of knowledge continues to burn brightly for all the generations to come.